Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are studying chapter 3 of Treatise of Teshuva from the Alter Rebbe's treatise on or essay on Teshuva. We should be on page 48, unless I hear differently from anyone here, which is section 2. And what we're talking about is the concept of fasting, where it relates to the concept of in Tshuva. We made it very clear that fasting is not part of Tshuva, and we emphasized that several times already, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But what we do know is that fasting is helping with redeeming your soul, which means after a person did teshuva and they want to be on a better standing with God, just like a servant who sinned in front of their king and got forgiven, they want to send a gift in order to be back as if the slate is clean and like it never even happened. It's a full reset. So we said then there's the concept of fasting in order to get to that place with God. And we compared it to two types of offerings. One was more of a sin offering, or another one was the I think the Ola offering. Either one, we said that the compromise we made is to do the number of fasts needed for a particular sin. You should do 3 rounds of it. So we gave the example, if it was anger, which a person should fast 151 times, we said that uh, every time you get angry, you would be fasting your whole life. So therefore, we said you should do 3 rounds of those fasts. But then, and we're going to learn more about it inside today. Don't get too excited. We're not supposed to be fasting in our generation, and therefore the Alter Rebbe is going to say today that we actually substitute this with charity. So I gave an overview last week. If you weren't here, I would suggest listening to a recording because I don't want you to end today's class thinking, "Oh my gosh, Rabbi Landa wants me to fast every day for the rest of my life." That's not what we want. We have to be healthy in body, healthy of spirit, and we emphasize several times that in our generation, fasting is not the way, unless it's the obligatory fasts from the Torah. We don't fast. In fact, if anything, fasting is more harmful for us than is good for us. It actually leads us to less of service of God than to more. In the olden days, and I want to explain just one thing that Steve, after last week's class, good morning, Shira. After last week's class, Steve called me and he gave a very good point, and I just want to mention it. He said that I was teaching it based on a teaching of the Rebbe that says that we're not second class. That in the olden days they were strong enough to fast. Nowadays we're just not strong enough to fast. Therefore, we have to substitute it. We get second best, which is charity. The Rebbe says it's not the case. Hashem chose what's best for every generation. Hashem knows that in the previous generation they needed fasting more in order to get closer to God. We in our generation need charity more. And Steve had a very good point where he said in the olden days, food was their main staple. It was something that they were was much meant a lot more to them than money. So therefore, for those days, whatever meant more to you is what you had to sacrifice, so to speak. So therefore, fasting was more of a priority in those generations if you were healthy. In our generation, money is more of a thing to us. It's about the Benjamins, it's about the dollars. So therefore, in our generation, it's more about the giving of charity, which means separating ourselves from that money. That is considered the fasting in our generation. So I like the way Steve, if I misquoted that, you could explain it again, but that's how I understood it, and that's how I'm giving it over. Um, Okay, so we're going to go into section 2 today, uh, um, chapter 3, which is on page 48. We're going to try to cover some text in order to see if we can even finish the chapter today. It may be a high calling, but at least we'll try. But of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute, ask, and let's go. And I'll pull it up on my Kindle as well. Uh, Okay, so this title, it might take a second for the Kindle to reboot. It's called When Not to Fast. And this is going to be an important thing because if we would have ended the chapter last week, it would have seemed like that's it. We fast and that's who we are. So now the Alter Rebbe makes a lot of conditions and concludes with the idea that it's actually not really meant for our generation. So let's see that inside. Let's just share the screen now. Here we go. I hope you could see, maybe in a second or two. There we go. The Tanya has endorsed the consensus view that for multiple violations of the same sin, one should fast 3 times the number of fasts recommended by Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria of blessed memory. This would mean, for example, that a person who emitted seed in vain multiple times in his youth, which was apparently a common concern among the Tanya's readership, would have to carry out 3 times 84, which equals 252 fasts at some point in his life in order to be desirable to God, as pleasing and cherished him as he was before the sin. Clearly, this would be punishing regime to follow. In this section of the Tanya airs some concerns about the negative implications of excessive fasting. However, the above is for a person who is strong and in good health, such that multiple fasts will not damage the health of his body at all, as was the case in the early generations when people were accustomed to fast more. But for a person whose health would be injured by multiple fasts, because they might bring him sickness or pain, God forbid, as is the case with most people in these generations. Right, and the Alter Rebbe is actually writing this in, I think, 1805. He's saying already in that generation, we're not equipped for it anymore. In such a case, Jewish law forbids a person to fast too much, even for transgression punishable by kares or the death penalty, and certainly for positive commands or prohibitions that are not punishable by kares. So it's actually, if a person can't handle it and they're doing it nonetheless, not only are they doing a good thing, they're actually sinning. They're doing a bad thing, which is quite fascinating. Rather, a person may only fast to the extent that he is absolutely sure he will not be injured by it. For even in early generations, the period of the earlier and later Talmudic sages, so going back to the era of like 200-300 CE, only healthy people who could withstand the strain would fast to such an extent. We have learned that for a person whose health would be injured by multiple fasts, Jewish law forbids a person to fast too much. The Tanya now cites a source from the Talmud for this point. So how do we know that it's forbidden? If a person cannot withstand the strain of and fast nonetheless, his act is called sinful by the Talmud in Tractate Tinus, chapter 1. And this is the quote. Shmuel said, whoever sins in observance of a fast, whoever sits in observance of a fast is called a sinner. Shmuel's words are directed even at an individual who has committed sins and wishes to fast for them, as the Tanya now proves from Rashi. Even if he fasts for his accumulated sins, as Rashi states, that these fasts cleanse his sins. Nevertheless, if he fasts for these sins when he is physically unable to do so, he is called a sinner. The Tanya offers another proof that Shmuel's teachings, whoever sits in observance of a fast is called a sinner, applies even to a person that has committed sins and wishes to fast for them. So here's another proof, and as the Talmud states in Tzvachim, chapter 1, that there is no person in Israel who is not guilty of neglecting a positive command, which means we all have neglected a command of not doing something we should have been doing. Everyone has at least one positive command that they have neglected. So Shmuel's instruction not to carry out fasts clearly applies even to a person who has sinned. All of us fall in this category. And this is true to a greater extent for a Torah scholar, who will be punished doubly for this sin of damaging his body and fasting. So really, this is for everyone, but especially as someone who's dedicating their life to Torah study, when he's subsequently unable to study properly because his health has been weakened by fasting. At that point, you're considered a sinner because you're not helping yourself. Through excessive fasting, the Torah scholar commits 2 sins. Number one, the sin of damaging his body. And number two, the sin of lost Torah study for his subsequent weakness, because when he's weak, you can't study as well. So therefore, there's actually 2 sins that a person would then be committing by fasting when they're too weak to fast. So I think that was pretty clear that it's really for the earlier generations, like the times of the Talmud, and even then only for the people that were strong enough to do it. But if a person is not strong enough and does it nonetheless, they are committing a sin by injuring themselves, by hurting themselves. And if the person would have been studying Torah otherwise, and now they're too weak to do it, they're actually committing another sin of neglecting Torah study because of their weakness. Yes, Shira.
How is it defined hurting your body? I mean, how is that defined?
That's a very good question. Shira wants to know, in case not everyone was able to hear, we're saying weakening the body or hurting the body. What's considered weakness? And I would think in our generation, weakness is feeling faint and feeling hydrated, pretty basic, I think. And that's why we don't fast in our generation anymore.
So pretty basic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I would think so. Meaning, I think the litmus test would be if a person's normally studying Torah at this time, but now because they're fasting, they're too tired or too weak to study. I would say that's weakening the body.
Okay.
And if anyone disagrees, you're welcome to hop in. But that's what I would say. Okay, section 3, practical solution. So now we're going to get into what we spoke about in charity, which again, last week we gave an overview, but now we're going to see the idea of charity, of substituting the charity for the fasts in the text. In section 1, the Tanya endorsed the intermediate view that for multiple violations of the same sin, one should fast 3 times the number of fasts recommended by Arizal for a single violation. In section 2, which we just read, the Tanya discouraged us from carrying out excessive fasting since it is likely to damage the body. So what is the solution? How are we to acquire the spiritual benefits of these fasts when our bodies are not capable of them? The Tanya suggests an innovative solution by following the verse, redeem your sin through charity. That's a quote from Daniel, the prophet Daniel. In substitute for fasting, it is possible to offer a charitable donation. The Tanya quantifies how much charity is to be given. And the legal code recommends 12 small coins, meaning this is going back to the time of the 1500s, 1600s when the Shulchan Aruch was written, to be given for each Teshuva fast day. But the Alter Rebbe updates it to the modern currency of the 1800s, which is equivalent to 18 large Polish coins, or they're called gulden, or 12.82 grams of silver nowadays. Well, how much is 12 grams of silver? Probably a lot more than $18, right? I'm actually curious. Let's just sorry guys.
12.8.
Does anyone have silver? Is silver silver? All right, let's see. Silver prices. How much is 10 grams? Oh, it's we get a bargain. 10 grams of silver is $7.89. So 12 grams, well, let's say be around
12.8. So
$10 or something.
well, really 13 grams. If you round it up. 12.8.
Hold on 1 second. Let me.
I was just gonna go for 18.
Oh, right. 18 is
Yeah.
I always thought it was 18, but I guess in the currency of the Polish coins it was 18. Nowadays it would be some 10. Okay. I guess let's see. Maybe we'll explain a little more over here if he updates it. Okay, let's see a little further. Um, hold on 1 more second.
It's 1.7.
Uh, sorry guys.
It says here that 12 grams of silver was worth $10.41.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Nancy.
So it says approximately $87 as of this writing on the bottom of the page.
Oh, it said that?
One, yeah.
Okay. Let's see it inside. I'm just trying. Just hold on 1 second, guys. I'm also just calling Kana school. Oh, okay. Got it. Okay, sorry about that. So 18 shittim, which is the currency of the Polish coins, I think, are equivalent to the biblical measurement of 1 sela. 12 shittim, or 18 Polish golden, are therefore equivalent to 2/3 of a sela. The contemporary value of a sela can be easily calculated since the sum through which we carry out the redemption of the firstborn is 5 selaim. 5 slime is 96 grams of silver. So 2/3 of a sela is 12.82 grams of silver, which is approximately $7 as of this writing. But now with inflation, it's probably double. Um, okay, so oops, sorry. Okay, good. This figure of 12 pshittim represents the minimum, but a wealthy person should increase according to his means, as Magen Avraham writes in the laws of fasting. Okay, so we got a little more of the context that we're supposed to do the fasting, but nowadays we substitute it with giving the currency of our time to charity in lieu of the fasting. And that's because if you would fast when you're not really strong enough to, that would be considered sinful. But now we're going to take another step up in section 4 with going a little bit higher, a little bit, not just in charity, but also trying to do some fasts. Section 4, a more stringent approach. In section 3, the Tanya proposed a solution to our earlier dilemma. According to the consensus opinion, we should really fast 3 times the number of fasts recommended by a resolve for transgressing multiple violations. On the other hand, in section 2, the Tanya argued that we should refrain from fasting since it is damaging to our health. So the solution proposed in section 3 was to redeem the required fasts through charitable donation. It turns out, however, that in the proposal in section 3 was a minimalist solution. So the Alter Rebbe is kind of going back and forth. We started by saying we should fast, but we're not strong enough, so we shouldn't fast. So we compromise and we give charity instead. But that's really just acting as a minimalist, just to give charity. Nevertheless, in section 4 now, we're going to say you should actually take another step up and do some sort of fasting. Any person who values his soul and desires to be closer to God, to repair his soul and return it to God with the best teshuva possible, should be stringent on himself to complete at least once in his life the recommended number of fasts for each transgression recommended by Arizal. So here in section 4, the Tanya suggests a more demanding path to try to actually adhere to the consensus opinion of fasting 3 times the number recommended by Arizal. Of the 3 times, at least one should preferably be carried out in the form of full fasts. The other 2 rounds of fasting can be carried out with a further leniency, as will be discussed below. The Tanya places a limit on this recommendation. You should do this at least for the serious transgressions which carry the death penalty, including even those sins which carry the death penalty through the agency of heaven. So there's either in going back to temple times when there was a Sanhedrin, which was a Supreme Court, there were things that were punishable by death of the hands of court. It was not common at all, to the point where it was definitely more of a deterrence. I think it says that. Not I think it says that a court who would put one person to death in 70 years was considered to be a bloodthirsty court. So that's pretty heavy. And then there's death in the hands of heaven, which means the court can't punish you for it, but it would be from the hands of heaven. An example would be eating on Yom Kippur. It's punishable by karis, which means that the person would pass away if they did it intentionally, and they did it with witnesses, and they verbally said, "I know it's Yom Kippur and I don't care, and I want to do it anyway," and then they ate with negligence. That the person would be punishable not by the hands of court, but by the hands of heaven. So now the Alter Rebbe is saying, and just again, the back and forth that we are saying is a person in chapter 2, we said that the Arizal recommends fasting for a certain number of violations. We gave the compromise of doing it 3 times, but then we said that in our generation we're not strong enough to fast and would be considered a sin, and therefore we should substitute it with charity. But now the Alter Rebbe is saying that over the span of a person's lifetime, they should try to do these fasts to some degree. And we should only be fasting for the more serious sins, which are things punishable by death, either by court or by heaven. And continuing over here on the next page, in our above example of emitting seed in vain, even multiple times, you should carry out 84 full fasts at least once in your life. However, since our ability to fast is weak, as noted in section 2, the Tanya proposes certain acceptable leniencies when fasting. These fasts could be delayed until the short days in the winter. And you might carry out, for example, around 10 or less fasts during one winter, so that the total of 84 fasts are completed in 9 years, or in more time if necessary, depending on your abilities. Since you have a lifetime to complete this one-time schedule of fasting, they can be spread out over many years. The Tanya advises it to be carried out in the winter months, since fasting is until nightfall, and the days are obviously shorter in winter. The Tanya suggests another leniency, and you could also ease the fast by eating a little up until 3 hours before sunrise. Since eating before sunrise early in the morning will also ease the fast, so you get up, you make yourself breakfast, and eat, and then go back to sleep, and then you start your fast by sunrise. Here, the author of Tanya recommends doing so only until 3 hours before sunrise, but in his Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law, and Siddur, the prayer book, he permits eating until the later time of Halos Shachar, which is the crack of dawn. So there's a lot of leniencies going on over here. The Tanya notes a requirement for those who wish to fulfill this practice. And it will still be considered a fast if you stipulated the previous day that you were going to eat upon arising. The Code of Jewish Law, which in Hebrew is called Shulchan Aruch, teaches that a person may only eat before dawn on a fast day if he did not go to sleep. But if he went to sleep, he cannot then eat or drink even before dawn, unless he made a stipulation before going to sleep that he was going to eat or drink later on. Anyway, that's more of a parenthetical thing. But let's get back to the point over here. As we have learned, the consensus opinion requires 3 times the number of fasts recommended by Arizal, which for spilling seed in vain is 3 times 84, which equals 252. The Tanya schedule of 9 years of winter fast has accounted for one of these 3 times, 84 fasts. So how are the other 2 times to be carried out to complete the total number of 252? And to complete the recommended number of 252 fasts mentioned above, one could carry out a further 84 half fasts, which is 4 times over. Meaning a half fast, meaning that one fast until just after midday. So you do that 84 times 2. So that's going to be 168. To complete the remaining fast, the Tanya suggests a further leniency of combining 2 half fasts, which are relatively easy to perform as one. And this is acceptable according to the Jerusalem Talmud. Since 2 half days are considered as one single day in this context, this has clarified how even an ordinary person can carry out the 252 fasts required for spilling seed in vain. And the same approach can be applied to the fast required for other sins which do not carry a severe punishment. For each heart knows its own bitterness and desires to be free of blame. Obviously, and that's a quote from Proverbs, I think. Obviously, a person knows which sins he has committed. Why did the Tanya need to cite a scripture to prove this point? The Tanya refers to a situation where you are certain you have committed an act, but you are doubtful if the act was sinful. For example, becoming angry is a sin for which Arizal recommends multiple fasts. But there are instances where anger is kosher, as an act of righteous indignation. When you have become angry, how do you know if you have sinned or not? The Tanya answers, your heart knows, and that's based on the teaching of the Rebbe. Okay, as we have learned, the consensus opinion requires just 3 times the number of fasts recommended by the Arizal for multiple violations. But what if a person desired to follow the stringent opinion mentioned in section 1 and carry out the number of fasts recommended by Arizal for every violation? So this is an interesting one. What if a person is taking the stricter side and he wants to fast for each sin that he has committed? So for anger and for desecrating Shabbat and for eating non-kosher and for not praying properly. So he wants to do all of these fasts and 3 rounds of each of them. So the Talmud discourages such an approach, but fasting beyond the consensus opinion of 3 times the Arizal's recommended number, which is the above case of spilling seed in vain, was 3 times 84, which is 252, or whatever the number might be in the case of other fasts, in order to follow the stringent position and fast the recommended number of fasts for each type of transgression, taking into account the number of times the sin was committed, is not recommended. One should not actually fast this excess amount, but redeem all such additional fasts through charity, to the amount of 18 Polish gulden for each fast day, which I think we said is around $12. Right, Nancy, is that what you said is the current currency? $12?
Uh,
Or
it's closer to $10.50
closer to 10?
right now.
Okay, got it.
Talked about inflation.
Inflation,
You're
right?
right.
All right.
Well, then with
No, I think
inflation,
Nancy
it
checked
might
it
be
up today,
more.
right? Right. I think the Tanya text said 7, like in the author,
Mhm.
but I think we're somewhere around 10. Okay, cool. Tanya recommends the consensus opinion as the maximum limit for actual fasting. If one wishes to take the stringent position into account, the additional fast should be redeemed through charity, as explained in section 3. So I just want to stop here for a moment and explain something just so special about this, because it's obviously a pretty intense chapter. But I do have to say, and I mentioned this on Shabbos, I was just discussing this at the Minyan on Shabbos, that I really do feel that in the olden days, there were so many other sacrifices that they gave. And nowadays, charity is really the calling of the hour. There's so, at least in our community, in our circles, there's so much charity that goes on. When I'm in Crown Heights in 770, which some of you have been with me and some of you have been on your own, you see people just coming around and people are just giving them. It could be $1, it could be $5, it could be even a coin, but you're always just ready to give. And I think that's something very special about our generation, which is, I think the call of the hour is really charity. So over here, the Alter Rebbe is going to be hammering in a point that our charity is the same as a fast. So if a person wants to be strict on themselves and fast not only the 3 rounds for each sin, but do each sin, uh, for each violation, do another round of fast. Nowadays, we do it through charity. So the more charity a person is giving, the more it's counting as part of their fasts. Which, if you think of it, is actually remarkable. That's actually adding to the first of all, it's refining my character, and it's adding to the reset of cleaning my slate for having committed a certain number of sins and having a stain on my soul, even after I've done teshuva. But I want to be in good standing with God. So charity is actually what's making that happen, which I think is just a fascinating idea. Okay, I'm going to pause here just to read some points that I skipped over, acidic thoughts on 49. So if you have the book, you're welcome to follow along. Otherwise, you could just listen. It is not advisable to take upon, this is from a letter of the Rebbe. This was written in 1964. The Rebbe says as follows: it is not advisable to take upon oneself extra fasts in addition to those which already are in the calendar. That is based on the words of the Alter Rebbe. Sorry, this is based on the words of the Alter Rebbe. One of the reasons which he mentions in this connection is that the generations have weakened and are no longer fit to have extra fasts. Obviously, my suggestion to you, therefore, is valid even now. The would-be resolution to undertake a fast should be changed to a resolution to serve God with an extra measure of joy and to endeavor to spread good influence in the environment in this direction. So over here in this letter from 1964, the Rebbe is saying to a person who took a resolution to fast for their past misdeeds, the Rebbe says you should actually change that resolution from fasting to, instead of fasting, it should be substituted with a resolution to serve God with extra joy and to bring that goodness into the environment, which is amazing. Okay, on page 51, there was a practical lesson. And I think this is the last one, at least to where we're up to. Um, it is forbidden to hurt your body through fasting. Nowadays, a penitential fast can be redeemed through donating around $7 to charity. And I think Nancy said it's closer to 10 now. Okay, and that is counting as a fast, which is amazing.
So serve Hashem with joy and give tzedakah.
Whereas I guess I'm a little caught off guard myself. Definitely joy was something that the Rebbe, it might even be that, in our generation, even more than the 1800s, joy is even more valuable than charity. Maybe the more charity you give, the more joy you're having. I'm not sure how to connect the two together. Yes, Chava, but I don't know if you have an answer to Shira or something else. But let's
No,
hear.
just something from the last
Oh, sure.
this past section is
Yeah.
that um giving the charity, I see how it also kind of ties into the things we do to come together as a community, like having to have a minion for certain prayers, having, the meals together, the things that keep us from being solo, right? So if you have to give charity, you have to give something to someone else. That's connecting you to community. You have to earn that money. That is very possibly having you work with people. And so I just saw that connection there.
Beautiful. That's a great connection. Very, very well said. Thank you, Chava. I fully agree with that. Awesome. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I
Yes,
I took away something else from this Hasidic thought, which is at the very bottom of this letter of the Rebbe says to
Yeah.
serve God with an extra measure of joy and to endeavor to spread good influence in the environment in this direction, which is not only to bring joy, but that our calling is also to spread goodness. So, when we see when we see anybody, that we spread goodness, not just spreading goodness, obviously, to the Jewish community, where we give a lot of our monetary charity, but also to spread the good influence. So I see that as what our larger environment. And I don't know if that's what the Rebbe was saying in this letter, but it seems to me he's wanting us to go beyond the extra measure of joy by saying, and to spread the good influence.
Amazing.
Treat your fellow man as yourself.
Right. And Chava's putting in the comments also to be a light onto the nation, which is a very good point. So Nancy, would you say it's actually 3 levels? There's charity, which is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. There's an extra measure of joy and also bringing goodness into the environment? Or are you saying it's all kind of tied into one? That when you bring charity,
no, I'm actually making it 3 different things. You're supposed to bring charity. We're supposed to bring charity, each of us.
Yeah.
We're supposed to serve God with joy, an extra measure of joy, and we're supposed to spread good influence in the environment in this direction. It doesn't say, it says in the environment. So I say that's in our larger environment. We live in a society right now where we are encountering Jews and non-Jews, and we're supposed to bring good influence there.
Beautiful.
So, I see it as 3 things.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay, we're at the bottom of 55 now. Oh, sorry. Shira, does that sound right? 55?
50.
So I'm looking more on the screen.
That's 54.
54.
Wait, we have 51. We have another practical lesson in 51.
Yeah, I'll read that one again. It is forbidden to hurt your body through fasting. Nowadays, a penitential fast can be redeemed through donating around $7 to charity. We updated that to 10. Yeah, we're on 55. If you're looking on the Kindle, it's toward the bottom of the page, and it's actually also towards the bottom of the page on 55. The Tanya recommends, actually 1 paragraph higher. One should not actually fast the success amount, but redeem all such additional fasts through charity to the amount of 18 Polish gulden for each fast day. The Tanya recommends the consensus opinion as the maximum limit for actual fasting. So again, the consensus opinion was 3 rounds. So even if a person wants to, the Alter Rebbe doesn't recommend it. The Alter Rebbe says, do it once, and then the rest you should do it in the winter times, and also substitute with charity. Actually, yeah. And but now the Alter Rebbe actually puts a limit on saying you can't do more than 3 rounds. If one wishes to take the stringent position into account, the additional fast should be redeemed through charity. So if you want to do it, it has to be done through tzedakah. Likewise, one should redeem through charity any fast required for sins which do not carry the death penalty, even for failing to observe positive commands, biblical or rabbinic. So, for example, if a person did not light the menorah on Hanukkah, which is actually a rabbinic mitzvah, if a person did not listen to the Megillah on Purim, which is a rabbinic mitzvah, if a person didn't eat the required amount of matzah the night of the Seder, which is a biblical mitzvah, or eat the maror, which nowadays is a rabbinical mitzvah, all those things, if you're neglecting from doing, even that you should substitute it with charity. Torah study, equaling them all, or you neglected studying Torah, Giving to charity according to the amount of fast stated in the Teshuva recommendations of Arizal, most of which are stated in Mishnah Chassid. Actual fasting is the preferable way to observe the consensus opinion, following the leniencies mentioned above, which we said do it in the winter, spread it over 10 years, do some half fasts, only in the case of severe sins, which carry the death penalty. All other fasts ought to be redeemed through charity alone. It is the same for all fasts. It is the same for all, which means all fasts should be redeemed with charity as above and not through actual fasting if a person cannot withstand fasting as above. If a person is unable to fast without injuring himself, all fasts must be redeemed through charitable donation. So I think this last line is much more relevant for our generation because fasting it does not come easy to us in our generation, and therefore all 3 rounds should be substituted with charity. Now, section 5, I think, is a really cool one. Is there a limit to charity? Right? Usually there's only 20% of our earnings are we allowed to give to charity. You're not allowed to give more because you're not allowed to. You ideally give 10%. A person who wants to be extra scrupulous gives 20%, which is a fifth, but not more. But now, what about if you're trying to make up for all these fasts? What if you want to give more charity? Could you? So the Alter Rebbe makes a really cool point that usually you're not allowed to give too much charity. But when it comes to redeeming your soul, it's not any different than the body. Just like you would spend any amount to heal your body, no matter the price, but you need to keep yourself alive. So you would spend any amount to heal your soul as well. And therefore you could exceed the 20% limit of charity for this sake, which is the last section of the chapter. Let's see that inside. Is there a limit to charity? Following the above advice may result in huge sums being owed to charity. This may pose a problem. Since the Talmud warns a person not to give more than a fifth of his income to charity, the Tanya now addresses this concern. Even if the above redemption, multiple fasts through charity will add up to a considerable sum, totaling more than a fifth of your income, you need not be concerned about the warning, do not overspend more than a fifth of your income on charity. So that's in the Talmud. It says, do not spend more than a fifth on charity. So the Alter Rebbe says, don't worry about that statement. It's not a contradiction. You're not violating that. The Talmud placed an upper limit on charitable donations of 1/5 of income to ensure that a person would retain enough money for himself and not become dependent on others. However, the Tanya will argue that the Talmud's ruling does not apply to this case. Because why? Because in this instance, the redemption of fast is not called a charitable overspending, because charity means giving away money to help another. But this money is being given for your own sake, to redeem your own soul from fasting and affliction. The Talmud's warning not to give more than a fifth of your income refers to funds given to help others. The Talmud's warning is don't help others so much that in the end you will need help from others. But in this case, you are redeeming the fast with charitable donations to help yourself, so that you will be desirable to God, as pleasing and cherished to Him as you were before the sin. And when it comes to self-care, there is no limit to how much money you can spend. Yes, Shira.
What if you're hurting yourself by giving to, like, hurting yourself or your family?
So that's a good question. I think we'll have to read further. If you weren't able to hear Shira's question, it's a very good one and a very valid one, which is that okay, so now I have all these violations that I've committed over the past 40 years of my life. Now I want to make up for it. And I want to do it right, which means I don't want to just do once. I don't want, and I know I don't want to fast because it's going to hurt me. So I'm going to give a lot of charity. I'm going to give $10 a day for the rest of my life. Maybe, okay, $10 a day is actually not going to break your bank account, but whatever amount it is, if I'm trying to make up for a lot of different fasts, it could actually take away a lot of my earnings, and to the point where it could affect. So we'll have to answer that. Let's see if the Alter Rebbe doesn't answer that by now. I mean, by the end of the chapter. If he doesn't, we'll address it. Okay, Shira?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to see if it's going to be, because I think we're almost done the chapter. So I think we have only a couple paragraphs left. Let's see it inside. But the point, and we didn't answer your question yet, Shira, but the point over here is a very valuable one. The whole reason why the Talmud puts a limit to the amount to give is because we don't want you to be dependent on others. We're not looking for more people relying on charity. So if you're going to give all your money away, you're going to need charity, and that's going to be a strain on the community. So therefore, you can't give money to help others, that's going to hurt you. But over here, it's actually helping you, because by substituting the fast with charity, you're actually being on a closer level with God and cleaning the slate of the sin that even though you did teshuva, you want to be on a higher place, like a gift to God. So therefore, you're actually doing it for yourself. It's self-care. And a person who's doing self-care, um, for example, if a person, God forbid, was diagnosed with a terrible illness, and God forbid they need a new kidney, what what would they not spare to get to make sure they could live? So the same would be for their spiritual on their spiritual account for their soul. I think that's the point. And let's see, Shira, if it doesn't answer your question by the end. I think we're towards the bottom of the Kindle page, but in this case, you are redeeming the fast with charitable donations to help yourself, right? We said that. So you will be desirable to God, as pleasing and cherished to Him. And when it comes to self-care, there's no limit to how much money you can spend. Redeeming the fasts is therefore no less important than healing the body or any other personal need, in which case there is no restriction on how much you may spend. Redeeming the fast for your spiritual well-being is, legally speaking, no different to paying a medical bill for your physical well-being. There is no upper limit. Practically speaking, this means since the number of tshuva-related fasts described above is very large in number, most people need to give huge sums to charity to redeem these fasts. Therefore, nowadays, all those who fear the word of God, which is a quote from Isaiah, are accustomed to give a lot of money to charity. This is due to the weakness of the people of our generation who are unable to strain themselves so much with excessive fasting. As is explained elsewhere in the Tanya's commentary on the verse, the kindness of God, for they are not concluded. Let me just see that in the Hebrew. It's Haste Hashem, Kilo Tamnu, which is from the book of Lamentations, the book of Eicha, the kindness of God, for they are not concluded. And I think what we're trying to learn from that verse is that there's no limit to the kindness, which is, I guess, the idea of charity. He quotes this from a different section of the Tanya, which we're not up to yet. But anyway, I just want to bring home a few points. Number one, it's very not a Jewish idea. It's like an antithesis to Judaism for a person to feel that they could sin and they buy their way out. Is that an expression? That give a certain amount and then it cleans your sin. I don't think that's the point. I think over here we're already at a place where you did teshuva, because teshuva does not mean money. Teshuva means taking ownership and commitment to not do it again, to let go of the sin, to separate yourself from it, to say I'm a change, I'm getting back to my roots. And then if it's a person that you hurt, it's going and apologize. And if it's God that you hurt, it's going to God, or both. If it's a person you hurt, you have to also ask apologies from the person and also ask from God. And have regrets and confess it to the person, take ownership over it, pray, Yom Kippur. Now, in addition to that, you want to reset. You realize that even though I did teshuva, but there's a character flaw in my soul where that came from, and I want to refine that. So in the olden days, to get closer to God, you did it through an offering in the temple, which we learned about in last week's Torah portion, a voluntary offering. When we don't have a temple, it's done through fasting. And in our generations, when fasting is not really something that we have the strength to do, we do it through charity, which, if you think of it, is actually more similar to the temple times, because to purchase an offering, it costs you money. You have to give your money in order to purchase an offering to bring to the temple. So now it's charity, which is a similar idea of sacrificing from yourself in order to be in better standing with God. But it doesn't mean that you did a sin, so you buy your way out. You did a sin, you're doing teshuva. But now, in addition to that, you want to be on a next level, closer to God, as if it never happened, cleaning the slate, and that's where charity will come in. So, if I'm understanding correctly, there is no limit to the charity we give in order to make up for these fasts that a person wants to. And I think towards the end of the chapter, what we said is in our generation, I just find it in the book over here, are accustomed to give a lot of money to charity, which is, a pretty strong statement, because it's making up for the fasting that we don't want to do in our generation. So Shira's question is still valid, which is, how much is too much? The Alter Rebbe said over here that there isn't the limit of 20%, just because if a person was told he needs a new kidney and it's going to cost him $300,000, they'll do whatever they can to raise the funds in order to give it. So of course, a person still has to be able to live and still has to be able to live well, but there shouldn't be the cap of charity of saying, I did enough already. I gave 10% or 20%. I don't have to give more. If it's for the sake of getting in a reset, and by the way, you don't have to, because over here we're not talking about teshuva. We're talking about trying to be on a level that's closest to Hashem, that's even beyond where teshuva can take you. So this is not obligatory. I want to make that clear. And if someone doesn't agree with me, I would love to hear. But this is beyond teshuva, right? The beginning of chapter, I think chapter 2, it says this: if you want to go above and be in a place that's closer to God, as if the sin never happened. In the title of chapter 2 was post atonement gift to God, right? That's if a person did teshuva, technically they don't. They in the times of the temple, they didn't have to bring the sin offer, the voluntary offering. It was a voluntary thing that they chose to do. So even this amount of charity is not obligatory on you. It's in order to take the place of fasting, which is also not obligatory, right? All this is post atonement. There's teshuva, there's atonement, and then there's even beyond that, trying to get closer. That's where charity comes in, to be on that step that's even closer. And to that, there isn't a cap. Of course, you still have to be able to afford your way of life, and you don't want to be a burden on the community. But at the same time, you want to know that just like for your body, a person would give whatever it takes to be able to not be in pain. Um, where we have a person who had to go on had pain in their mouth and they had to go a very expensive mouth surgery procedure. But for them, it was worth it, even though it cost them a fortune and it wasn't covered by insurance, but because they couldn't live in that pain. So there's a pain on the soul that's feeling distant from God, even though you did teshuva. So you're not distant anymore, but you just don't feel that you're in the same close place as you could have been from before. And on that, you're ready to spend and give charity. And for every person, it's different. I could tell you that when I go to New York, for the kinnis. I have no idea how this happens, but I never really shared this with anyone. But there's a family um, that he's not even there because he doesn't want all the graciousness and people thanking him, but all the shluchim that come in, and there's somewhere around 4,000 shluchim. There's certain hours that you could come to his house, and there's checks, a stack of checks made up. It used to be when I first became a Chabad rabbi, it was like $100, and now more recently it became like 150 because of the cost of everything. Just checks already written out. All you have to put is your name on it, and you can take a check. There's even a l'chaim. You can make a l'chaim. All he wants is to give charity to all the shluchim that come in, which is and for him, he wants it to go to your family. He wants this to go to buy something special for your kids. He wants it to go not to know buy an extra tray of chicken for the Purim party. He wants us to go for, and I'm talking. I think I'm gonna guess when I go visit, there's at least 2 dozen people at the same time, and there's people going in and out for at least 6 or 7 hours. I'm talking about at least I think 1,500 people that go through his door, and each one of them is receiving a check of $150, and he doesn't even know who. He's not even there. But for him, it's just the idea of just giving charity. Listen, he could afford it, and he's not selling his house in order to make this happen. But there's a certain level of realizing that charity is helping myself also. It's there for the betterment of the world, as Nancy was quoting from the Rebbe's letter. You're bringing more into the world through goodness, but it's also something of that personal level that you're reaching through this concept of charity. There's certain stories. I'm very good friends with the Chabad rabbi in Santa Rosa, and his father-in-law, who I only knew a little bit, passed away almost 20 years ago. I think 18 years ago or so. Passed away in like 2008 or 2007. And he, he was a philanthropist to a lot of causes. And there were certain times that his business wasn't doing well, but the Rebbe still encouraged him to give big amounts of charity. And the Rebbe knew his financial concerns. So, in order to fulfill a pledge that the Rebbe made on his behalf, can you imagine? The Rebbe said you should be able to give $100,000. And this was in the 70s or the 60s. He didn't have the money. He took out a loan in order to be able to fulfill a pledge that the Rebbe recommended of him. And within a year, he saw a tenfold amount of revenue that he brought in. So, there's a certain level that you give because it's the mandated amount of 10% of charity. There's a certain amount you give because I want to redeem my soul from any suffering or any pain, or I want to be closer to God. But then there's also a trust that the more charity a person gives, it's not going to hurt you at all. Definitely, it's the level to be at, and I'm not there. A person, he was ready to mortgage his house to, whatever it took in order to give more charity. And I remember I spoke to my friend. He said he wouldn't even give this charity to any of his family. He had many family who ran big, successful Chabad organizations. He didn't want it to go to any family. He wanted to go to someone he never knew because he wanted to be totally genuine without any expectation that maybe this is to support the cause that's closer to him. So anyway, a lot to talk about on the concept of charity. And in fact, the next book of Tanya are letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote to communities. One of the main themes of all the letters is about the idea of giving charity. And the Rebbe says it's going to help you more than it helps the poor, just the giving of the charity, which some of you are familiar with this idea just from studying. Um, and I mean, in our generation, I think charity is really where it's at. So we're saying even more than fasting, we give charity, which is, I think, just an incredible idea. Um, okay, I think that concludes chapter 3. God willing, next week we'll continue with chapter 4, which is getting a little bit deeper into the Kabbalistic idea of Teshuva.
I have
Any
a
questions? Yeah,
I
sure.
have a question. I also have this sense that charity not only is money, but it's also giving of ourselves to others. And I don't mean that it reduces our need to give actual dollars, in our currency. But if you could address that issue, because to me, there's some part of the giving of ourselves
Yeah.
without payment, without receiving payment,
Right.
somehow is in there. It's the just and right thing to do, which is tzedakah. So could you maybe address that either now or next
Yeah,
week?
no, I love it. I myself struggle with it. I would say that charity is about where it hurts the most, where it's taking the most out of you to do. And I think what hurts us the most, I think like Steve was telling me on the phone last week, is the money. So for sure, charity, the way I teach charity to kids is we all go around, I give them coins every Sunday at Hebrew school and whenever it is, and they all give a charity, a coin in the pushka, the stuck a box, as we call it. And then I also explain about charity with sharing your toy or giving, if you know a little bit better of, for like seventh graders, a little bit better in the math, and someone asks you for help, when you give your time, you're doing a charity at that point. But honestly, I think what hurts us, what takes the most out of us is to give our cash, I think. So that's why, like you said, Nancy, it's not to take away from the charity of money, but definitely, I think I agree with you that charity does exist in other forms, and tzedakah means doing the just thing. So it's not just in money; it's in anything. It's doing the right thing. But I do think there's something so valuable about the actual handing over of money, like Chava was saying before, the money that you earn with your sweat, blood, and tears, and you're giving that away, it's almost like your whole body is involved in the mitzvah of charity. Whereas when you're giving, your ability of knowing math better than a friend, and therefore you're going to sit down with them at math. You're not giving from your whole body. You're giving from your mind, or you could give from yeah, maybe your time is part of all of you. I don't have a full answer, and I would love if there's any comments. I know Shira wants to add something to
I
that.
just want to say
Yeah.
you love Hashem with all your might.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, actually, someone on Shabbos, Steve, who said that? I think it was Ken Silver on Shabbos when we were talking about this concept of Teshuva. He quoted exactly that, Shira.
Okay.
He said that in the Shema, when we say you shall love God with all your heart, with all of Vafa, and with all your soul, with all your nafsecha, is the Hebrew, and then it says b'chol me'otcha, b'chol me'odecha, with all your might, or another translation I saw is with all your with all of you. It's referring to all your money. That's how the Talmud says, b'chol mamoncha. It actually refers to with all your money, which is a fascinating idea. Yeah, very good, Shira. Yes, Naomi. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
You, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as usual, I'm trying to take away a practical application. And,
Give all your money to Chabad. Yeah, it's practical.
So, the practical application about fasting, I got from what we've read that we're still supposed to fast if we've done some kind of sin that's punishable by death. Is that right?
So in the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, in the chapter we just read, in the sections of the chapter we just read, we should try to do the fasts at least once, and then the other ones we could substitute. But what I said in the overview last week and maybe a couple of weeks ago is that that our Rebbe actually banned it entirely. We don't even do we don't even do the prescribed number of fasts one time. We should do it all through charity, because in those days they weren't strong, but they were strong enough to maybe do it in winter months. Nowadays we don't.
We have enough with the public fast.
Exactly, right, exactly. So I think it was 1988 when the Rebbe, made this calling of, our generation is beyond the fasting of the Alter Rebbe's time. And I think that maybe I shared the story, maybe I didn't, so I'll just share it again, where Steve, maybe I just shared it with you on the phone, whereas there was the spiritual mentor of a very big, prominent Chabad yeshiva. It's in France. It's in a suburb of Paris called Brunois. Many of my friends went there to study, and the mentor of the yeshiva boys there from the 50s and 60s was an incredibly spiritual person. The Rebbe actually called him Beinoni of the Tanya. So now, for those that study the 53 chapters of the first book of the Tanya, we know that a Beinoni is not just a simple level. To be a Beinoni is like the top. And the Rebbe called this man, the spiritual mentor, Beinoni of the Tanya. And the Rebbe rebuked him because he was saying that he was trying to encourage the yeshiva boys to be more what we call iskafia, which we learned in the first book of the Tanya, which is to hold yourself back. So hold yourself back. You have a good plate of macaroni and cheese for lunch in yeshiva. Hold yourself back. You don't have to have the full macaroni. Have the macaroni without the cheese. That's what he would, you could have bread or you could have butter. You don't need to put the bread on the butter. That was his way. Like, don't indulge yourself. That was his. I remember, hearing that from the yeshiva boys.
Except for Shabbos, right?
Except for Shabbos. But he was, so the spiritual mentor was trying to encourage the boys to not be so indulgent on their food. And the Rebbe told him that that's not for our generation. Nowadays, iskafia, which means to hold yourself back, has to do with our speech. Hold yourself back from speaking things that you want to speak that you shouldn't be. And it has to do with our mind, holding yourself back from allowing your mind to wander in places that it shouldn't be. But it doesn't apply to food. Food, you don't have to hold yourself back from, which is a fast. So that was the Alter Rebbe's, our Rebbe stance. Whereas, like, Nancy was saying before from the letter we quoted in section 2, I think, of this chapter, where about more putting ourselves in excessive joy with an extra measure of joy. It's not about fasting anymore. Naomi, does that answer your question? Okay, good. All right, so we're a little over time. I apologize for that.
Well, basically answers it. We don't have to do any fasting, no matter how horrible our sins are, except for on
exactly. Besides for the obligatory fast, right? Besides for the ones that's mandated in the Torah, we don't fast other than we give charity instead. So if you're ready to do that regimen, you do it through charity.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week for chapter 4.
See you
Thank
around.
you.